So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Andrea Allen, and I'm president of the Alumni Association. And the event this evening, Best Practices in Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, is brought to you by the Alumni Association for the Factor-Inwentash School of Social Work. Welcome. We're very happy to see you this evening, and we're very pleased with the response you gave as we tried to prepare the content for you. So I'd like to start off by doing a land acknowledgement, and then I will turn over to Laval, our guest speaker, Laval Martin. And so I'll start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll move forward. So I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this location is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. It is still the home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And we acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work and study on this land. We all have a responsibility to be active players in the decolonization of which we are currently enacting by learning, showing up, speaking up, and staying informed about the needs and desires of our Indigenous comrades. I also acknowledge the people like myself who were brought across the transatlantic without being given a choice. People who were brought on the transatlantic human trade ship. We must recognize other nations who came to this land by choice through colonialism. Some forgot that they are settlers. We give thanks to the Indigenous ancestors for their patience, but acknowledge that it has been exploited. Can we take a few moments to reflect, as each of us are at different parts of the province, country, and just reflect on the Indigenous people who may have been misplaced as we stand on their land? This land acknowledgement is not performative. It reflects my commitment and readiness to stand beside our Indigenous comrades towards their reclamation. I encourage, if you are aware of whose land you are on, please write that in the chat and we can share it with each other. Thank you. So as I introduce myself, my name is Andrea Allen. I'm president of the Alumni Association, and we're very pleased this evening to offer you a session on best practices in dialectical behavior therapy. Our guest is Laval Martin. He is also a graduate of the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work. It's one of those nights. Anyway, Laval, I'm going to turn it over to you, and welcome everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrea. All right. So welcome everyone. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, discuss how I like to facilitate webinars, and then we will dive into the material here. All right, so I do my best to operate from an anti-oppressive perspective. I'm going to assume that most, if not all of us here are familiar with AOP, and if not, we are going to briefly do a refresher on that a little bit later in the evening here. So this is an ongoing lifelong learning process, and I would ask if you observe me saying or doing something that is oppressive in some way, like, hey, that's ableist or transphobic or what have you. If you're willing, please bring that to my attention so I can continue to grow and learn. I'd ask that we all operate from this anti-oppressive perspective here today, creating a safe space, but I put that in quotation marks because I can't control what people do have to leave or so on. So this goes along with two other concepts, one being confidentiality. So whatever we discuss here, stays here. And on that note, do be mindful that we are being recorded. So I believe it's only my face that's being recorded, but if you ask a question or something, that may be reflected in the recording. So please be mindful, again, confidentiality, what you choose to share. So confidentiality, and then the other point is you're free to opt out of anything we do. So don't feel any pressure to participate in any particular way. Just be mindful of your own comfort level when participating. Okay, I'd like to talk about why I'm not an expert. When I first started studying martial arts, one of my instructors would show a technique or talk about something, and then he'd be like, "Oh, but like, I'm not an expert." And I used to wonder, then why am I paying you? Um, but also, it's like, you've done this for 30 years. How can you not consider yourself an expert? Now I think I see where he was coming from, that we all have one set of experiences, but that's nothing compared to what's out there. So I like to say that together, collectively, we're the expert. So this goes along with the idea of feel free to ask questions anytime. You can type your questions in the chat box, or there's also a dedicated Q&A box, which, well, for questions, I suppose it might be better to put it in the Q&A box. But in any event, we will do our best to get through those at the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So you can ask your question anytime while it's still fresh on your mind, and then I will attempt to answer it toward the end of the presentation. And if I'm not able to answer it, I will also be giving you my contact info, so you can connect with me after and reach out, and we will get you the information that you need. All right. A little bit about my personal background. So I studied social work, both I have an undergrad and a master's degree in social work. I studied at Toronto Metropolitan University and then did a master's at U of T here at the faculty. So cool. I've studied self-defense, not particularly relevant for this thing other than my preceding anecdote there. And worked in the field in various ways since 2006, working in some group home shelters, drop-ins, working with people experiencing homelessness and poverty, mental health challenges, developmental disabilities, things of that sort. And went through burnout back in 2013. Not as much fun as the brochures make it sound. Turns out, wouldn't really recommend that. But that prompted me to take a new direction in life, and now I do training like this, and I also have a private practice where I deliver psychotherapy and primarily dialectical behavior therapy. So hence this webinar this evening. Okay, so a few of the principles I strive to enact. Having a non-judgmental stance. We'll talk a little bit about the mechanics of how do you do that a little bit later on today. And being anti-oppressive, and coming from a strengths-based approach, and also being evidence-informed, or in other words, the best practice of today's webinar. Okay, so I want to start by situating. Well, first, actually, let me take a step back and say, hey, we have a little bit over an hour together, and that potentially seems like a long time to you. It does not seem like a long time to me. So I may be speaking quite quickly and trying to get through a lot of these things. I also would like to give us as full of time as possible for the Q&A section, so I can try and answer as many questions as I can. I do have a tendency of packing these things with much information, even though to me, I'm like, oh, I wish I could pack in more. So anyway, I will likely be speaking quickly. You will have access to the recording, so you can always come back and play it at a slower speed if you need to. Anyway, so I want to start by situating DBT in the context of other psychotherapy approaches or modalities. So here is just a few of the other modalities. Down here at the bottom, you can see there's a Wikipedia link if you want to check out the several hundred different modalities in psychotherapy. So DBT is here under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And there's a few other kind of common or frequently used therapies. So DBT is part of the third wave of CBT, along with some of its sister therapies, such as ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy by Stephen Hayes. Anyway, so there's a bit of context here. Now let's talk about the history of DBT. So as I just mentioned, DBT is a subset under the umbrella of CBT. So DBT is under there. And it was created by Marsha Linehan in the late 80s, and she published her first book on it in 1993. Okay, it was originally created for treating people with intense suicidal ideation and suicidal behaviors. They were on an inpatient program, hospitalized, and there was a high degree of overlap there with folks who were diagnosed with borderline personality disorders or BPD. And DBT was the first treatment that was shown to have efficacy for treating BPD. There are now several others as well. Originally, it was designed as a one-year program inpatient, and we'll talk about the different components of DBT. There's 4 of them. We'll talk about those later. But basically, they would go through for the skills training portion, they would take that for 6 months, and then they would go through that same training again for the following 6 months. And then in the meantime, they would have access to the other aspects of DBT as well. Okay, DBT is a very skills-based modality. We believe that people can learn new skills and apply them in their life, and then this will, improve their experience in life. And also there are a lot of acronyms. Some people asked in the feedback about this, how do I remember all the acronyms? Don't worry, there's been times where I have to, sneakily or not so sneakily, be like, let me just look up what that acronym stands for again. So, that's fine. The point of the acronym, it's, in theory, supposed to serve as a mnemonic device to help us remember some of the skills. And of course, that works really well for some people. And some of us, don't resonate so well with the acronym. So use it if it's helpful to you, and, don't worry so much about it if it's not. Would be my suggestion. All right. So who is helped by DBT? What populations has there been evidence suggesting that DBT can be beneficial or helpful? So I've drawn these from Behavioral Tech, which is Marshall Linehan's organization. And so if you want to follow up and look at the original studies, you can check out the link here and find the original studies. Okay, so not too surprisingly, there's a lot of evidence saying that DBT is helpful treating folks with BPD, and folks with BPD also who have specific subpopulations there. So folks struggling with suicidal behaviors or self-harming behaviors, substance use, PTSD, and high levels of irritability. And it's not only folks with BPD that can benefit from DBT. Some other examples are cluster B personality disorders more broadly, folks with self-harming behavior and other personality disorders, folks with ADHD, PTSD, and specifically the ones I saw were around childhood sexual abuse, major depression, bipolar, emotion dysregulation, adolescents who struggle with suicidality and self-harm, pre-adolescent children with severe emotional and behavioral dysregulation, binge eating disorder, and bulimia nervosa. So those are some examples. Am I saying that DBT will not help with someone who doesn't have one of these things? No, I think DBT can be helpful with a wide range of populations and clients, and just here's some with specifically studied populations. Okay, a few other aspects here. Age, there's been demonstrated efficacy down to age 7, so from 7 onward. Again, does this mean it won't work with someone who's 6? Not necessarily, just, this is the evidence base. Diverse sexual orientations, people of diverse racialized groups, and male and female gender. So now I want to touch here upon, I'm not aware of research focusing specifically on non-binary people. And also, I don't think particularly the studies back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s were not, capturing if folks were cis or trans. So there's definitely some, room for further research there. And that kind of brings us into the next topic of critical reflections on DBT. So I want to take a step back and think a little bit about what is AOP, anti-oppressive practice. So there's a concept that, there's power operating everywhere throughout society, and that power is unequally distributed. And so therefore there can be hierarchies of oppression that occur. And the idea of intersectionality means depending on people's different social identities, they may be finding themselves at the top or bottom of that hierarchy of oppression in various ways and places in our life. And the idea of anti-oppressive practice then is to try to work towards a world where we can level the playing field and people are not impacted in their experience of life based on factors over which they have no control. So according to Karen Healy, there are 5 principles of anti-oppressive practice. And so this tends to be how I think about AOP through the lens of these 5 pillars or principles. So one is critical reflexivity, the idea to look inwardly, not just self-reflection, but taking it a step further and saying, what am I bringing to this scenario? How might I, through my actions or inactions, through my own innate biases and preconceived ideas, how might I be perpetuating systems of oppression? And I'm proving to just be one more cog in the wheel of creating that systemic oppression. And then once more of that, trying to change that, obviously. Okay, second thing is understanding the client's experiences of oppression. So I'm not going to come into a situation and tell someone, oh well, you're experiencing ableism. I want to hear from them, their experiences. So I'm not going to say it is or isn't or whatever. It's not my impression. I want to hear from them. What's their experience? I might suggest, like, hey, that kind of sounds like that could be racism going on there. What do you think? And we can explore it. And yet, I want to understand their perspective. Okay, third idea is empowerment. Kind of, giving someone a fish is helpful, and of course, teaching them the skill to be able to acquire resources for themselves, probably much more helpful in most cases. So the idea of empowerment, helping our clients to gain power, and therefore they're not dependent upon us as helpers. That kind of goes hand in hand with the fourth element, which is partnership, that we work together. Now, we want both ourselves and our clients to be putting energy into the therapeutic relationship. It doesn't mean it has to be 50-50. That may not be possible or desirable. And yet we want, all parties involved to be contributing to the therapeutic experience. And then finally, number 5, minimal intervention. This was the one I struggled with when I first encountered this idea. I thought, well, shouldn't we help more? Shouldn't we help as much as we possibly can? And now I think I see the wisdom of this idea, minimal intervention, that oftentimes when we do too much and try too hard, it can work against that empowerment piece we spoke about earlier, and also it can start to be me imposing my views and my values onto the person. So anyway, those are the 5 principles of anti-oppressive practice according to Karen Healy. So now let's see, how do these line up with anti-oppressive, with DBT, so DBT through an AOP lens. And so first let's look at what are some of the ways that DBT is in conflict with AOP. And if you have some ideas, you can also pop them in the chat here. I'll try and monitor that at the same time here. Okay, so here are a few ideas that I thought of. So first of all, there are general critiques of psychotherapy in general that also apply to DBT. So one being that often research is done on what they call weird populations. This is not a DBT acronym, but it is a different acronym. So this, if I recall correctly, stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic populations. And so most of the research on psychotherapy and its effectiveness is done in weird populations. And weird populations are in fact weird. They are statistical outliers in terms of the overall, global population of 8+ billion people. So how, applicable is the research done, here in these weird populations if we look at everyone on the planet? That's an open question. So, that's one critique. Another critique could be access to therapy. It's not something that's easily accessed by, many people. There are many people who cannot, or very difficult for them to access it. And then also having the resources to be able to acquire psychotherapy can be quite challenging. Another critique is psychotherapy like telling you, "Oh, well, what's wrong is about you, and you need to fix yourself, and so that you can better fit into society," rather than acknowledging, hey, maybe society is the problem, right? Maybe there are these systemic challenges, these systems of oppression that are, creating some of the difficulties and challenges that a person faces. So is psychotherapy more, geared towards kind of blaming the victim in those cases? Those are some general critiques that are probably applicable to all forms of psychotherapy, including DBT. And so another idea is perhaps that DBT more specifically engages in cultural appropriation. So DBT has borrowed a lot from Zen Buddhism, and Marshall Linehan is not a practicing Zen Buddhist, nor are the majority of DBT practitioners. So is enough deference given to the source of some of these concepts. So that's an open question there. And perhaps you won't be too surprised to learn that I do in fact believe that there can be a good alignment here between DBT and AOP. Let me just check. Okay, so someone had said in the chat here, a way DBT conflicts with AOP I've encountered is that a lot of examples in the official materials can be very white and middle class, heterosexual, cisgender in content. This example is one that is modifiable by practitioners when we consciously alter the examples we use to be relevant to our clients. Nice. Good. So there's a great example where there's a challenge that's arisen, right? We recognize, hey, a lot of the just examples that are given are, they're revealing the author's perspective. And if we're aware of that, then we can take steps to, be more inclusive in our examples. And nevertheless, the critique, stands that, more work could be done to be more inclusive there. Okay, so thank you. Good example. All right, so again, you won't be surprised to learn that I do believe there's a good alignment here. So let me go over how I think that DBT can be practiced in an anti-oppressive way. Now, similar to the example that was just given, it's by no means guaranteed. One can certainly do DBT in a way that most people would say, yep, that's high quality dialectical behavior therapy, and yet it to be not in alignment with AOP principles. So we need that conscious awareness to be able to have both. All right, so first principle from Karen Healy, critical reflexivity. So we'll talk more about this later, but there's a consultation group. The idea that I, as a DBT practitioner, will not just be, meeting with my client and in a little bubble there. I will be getting input from other colleagues of mine who are also trained in DBT. And if we make sure that they are also on board with the idea of anti-oppression, then we can bring that AOP lens into the consultation group, and we can be on the lookout for ways in which we are contributing to systemic oppression. Okay, in terms of understanding the client's experiences of oppression, I think the DBT skill of validation works really well here to empathize and understand someone else's perspective without necessarily needing to agree or disagree with their perspective, just validating it as it is. In terms of empowerment, DBT is very focused on skill building, as I mentioned. There's a philosophy of doing things with our clients rather than doing things for them. So that's in alignment with empowerment. The idea of working in partnership goes along well with the idea of a dialectic, where there's two sides of an equation. And there's an analogy about a rowboat. So if my client and I are in the same rowboat together and each of us have one oar, if only one person is rowing, then we're going to just go around in circles. So we need both of us to be actively engaged in the therapeutic process here. Okay, then finally, minimal intervention. I didn't have a specific, skill I could target there, but I think it's very much in alignment with the idea of doing as little as is necessary to accomplish the desired goal. And I also wanted to pause here and talk specifically about DBT and how we could go against, this thing I mentioned here, the conformity to societal expectations, and talk about how would we utilize a DBT perspective in the face of systemic oppression. I gave the example of racism because that was something that was brought up once or twice in the responses people gave here to the survey. So what am I to do if I have a client who is highlighting, experiences of racism as being part of the challenges they're facing? And, so I don't want to minimize their experiences. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge that, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to, radically overthrow the system or change things on a dramatic level. So how do we carry that tension there? So I think that, there's a principle that all we can do is control ourselves. So I think that being aware of, like, helping the client to be aware of the ways that Howard's operating and the systemic oppression that is taking place, and then helping them to address their reactions to that understanding. So there's a saying, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention, right? So perhaps this person may experience anger, and we don't want to minimize that. We want to validate that anger or sadness or whatever emotions they're feeling. And at the same time, then, so fully express and experience the emotions, accept those, and then also ask, all right, now what? How, in the face of this reality, what course of action would you like to take? What is, both realistic and possible, and also, how can you actually live out your values in the face of this? I'm not 100% sure this is coming across clearly, but I hope as we go through some of the skills, we'll start to see how there can be an intersection here between the kind of heavy skill focus of DBT in the context, the AOP context of understanding the broader scenario and situation. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A section if you want more clarity at that time. Okay, so a bit about the theoretical underpinnings of DBT. So the first, and it's in the name, so you can tell it's important here, is the idea of a dialectic. So what is this? An idea from philosophy, basically a balance between opposites. So we might think of a thesis, one idea, its opposite, the antithesis. Typically these things, one negates the other. It's either or. And often there's a tension there, and often there's a pressure, between these two. So the idea of a dialectic is to say, okay, can we look for a way in which both could be true? Is there some synthesis of these two ideas that pulls together the strengths of both? So it's this idea of a middle path. Now, middle doesn't have to be 50-50. Again, it could just, somewhere in the middle there. And the idea of both and instead of either or. Okay. So we'll come back to talking more about how that dialectic idea applies to several other points in DBT. Okay, so when someone shows up for therapy in DBT, and this is, there's similar models for most therapeutic approaches. In DBT, we'd say there are 4 stages of therapy. So stage 1 is crisis stabilization. So typically, people come to therapy because there's some crisis or challenge going on in their life, and they would like to address that. Now, not always. Sometimes people show up to therapy in stage 4, which is awesome. And typically, most often, they come in stage 1. So they have some sort of crisis going on, and we'll talk more about targets on the next slide. And the key here is we want to reduce any life-threatening behaviors and any therapy interfering behaviors. So keep them alive and keep them in therapy so that therapy has a chance to work. Okay, then once we should also say in crisis stabilization, it's about 1, stop making things worse. So find ways to not be feeding into the crisis, and then the second part of that is about building skills. So this is where we do most of our skill building here in stage 1. And the idea then is when I have those skills, I can now go on to stage 2 which is digging down and finding what is the root cause of the challenge the person is facing. So that could be things like trauma or past experiences, childhood experiences. Also fitting here would be, if we look at the AOP lens, those systemic factors. So things like sexism or whatever could fit here as a root cause of why are you facing some of the challenges you face in your life. And so again, we can't change a lot of these things. We can't change the past. We can't change, great things about society, at least not in the short term. And identifying them and then finding ways to use those skills we built in stage 1 to address the causes we've identified in stage 2. Okay, and then so the idea is when we go through these first 2 stages, then stage 3 is now the client is living a ordinary life of ordinary pain and ordinary pleasure. So they're just kind of living a, I hesitate to use, but this is what they call it, ordinary life. And originally that was it. There was these 3 stages. And then some clients were coming back to Marshall Linehan and saying, hey, I feel like I'm normal, quote unquote, now, but I still feel like something's missing. And so she added this 4th stage of self-actualization. So finding meaning and purpose in our life. I also like to think about that in stage 1, it's very clear, what do we do? Stage 2, mostly pretty clear what we do. And then, stage 3 and 4, it gets more and more kind of ambiguous and flexible. There's no manual, there's no recipe for self-actualization. So with our client, we are discovering this together with them. And we're kind of sailing together with them into the unknown. So we can't expect a cookie cutter process to get us there. Okay. All right, so key behavioral targets, particularly in stage 1. And by the way, let's go back a slide for a moment here. We talk about stages, and people aren't necessarily discretely in one stage or the other. We can work on all of these stages all the time, and just it's the focus. Typically at the beginning of therapy, we're focused mostly on crisis stabilization. Then we move on, but we might find we need to come back to stage 1, work on a skill. Even on the first day, we might be talking about self-actualization. So it's a bit more of a spectrum. Just want to clarify that. Okay, so key behavioral targets. Number 1, most important thing is identifying any life-threatening behaviors. So if the client is having any suicidal ideation or suicidal behaviors, we definitely want to target that. Trying to eliminate as much as possible those things. Self-harm, similarly, specifically the person is not intending to die with self-harm, and they may kind of accidentally end up dying. So we want to eliminate the self-harm, and if that's not possible, then harm reduction, try to replace that self-harm with something less potential for lethality. And also certain impulsive behaviors. So if the person is reckless driving or engaging in other impulsive behaviors that might result in their death, like maybe substance use or whatever, then we want to target those specifically to try and minimize the odds that our client will unfortunately die. So that's our number 1 most important thing. And then the second target is to therapy interfering behaviors. So either, for example, clients not showing up to sessions, or they show up to the session and they're not engaging in the most helpful way, whether that is they start diverting to, we're fine with the client, venting or whatnot. And if they spend the whole session doing that, again, that might be fine. And we're not necessarily making progress on the, skill building or other aspects of therapy. So we might want to, target that. I'll give a quick example. I had a colleague of mine who a client she saw, and the first session, the client talked the whole session about her ex-boyfriend. They'd just broken up. And so she talked the whole session about him. Second session, same thing. Third session, my colleague was like, all right, hang on, time out. We're going to set a boundary. And, you can talk about your ex for the first half an hour. And then the second half an hour, we're going to talk about anything else. And the client, so this is like shaping, if we think about behavioral modification, right? And the client was really grateful. She said, wow, no one's ever told me that I can just like put a boundary around, what I talk about, right? So there's an example of working on therapy and interfering behaviors. Another example might be the person is not doing the, we call it home practice between sessions. So we might want to help them try and figure out why is that happening, what's getting in the way, and how can we problem solve together how to get them to do that. Okay, and then third target is quality of life interfering behaviors. So if the client is doing things that are just making their life more challenging and chaotic. So for example, frequent conflicts with romantic partners or friends or family, getting fired frequently from jobs, or these sort of things. We want to try and see how can we minimize some of those to create some more stability for our client, so that they can then have more energy and attention and focus on making the changes they want to make. All right, in DBT, there are 4 aspects to full DBT therapy. I, offer DBT informed therapy because, as you'll see, I think why, I do not engage in all 4 of these. Right, so the first aspect is individual therapy, where we meet, one-on-one with a client. And then the second element is skills training. So this is often done in a group. It could be done individually, one-on-one, and often it's done delivered in a group format. This was originally separated because Marcia was finding that if we were trying to teach the skills in the therapy session, and the client is focused on, like venting or talking about what's going on in her life, and wanting validation and reassurance and these sort of things, and so there was a tension there. So she separated this. So we can have the individual therapy, and then the skills training can be done separately. Okay, the third element is 24-hour support specifically for skills coaching. This, as you might imagine, is the element I do not offer, being now an individual. If you're in an inpatient, unit in a hospital, it's a little bit easier. Even when I was working at the clinic, outpatient, clinic I was working at, it was more feasible. We could, take turns and so on. That being said, when I first signed up to work at the clinic, I was worried, oh no, like every day at 3 a.m., I'm going to get a phone call, and that didn't happen. In fact, it was the opposite, where I would be in therapy with someone, they would tell me about things that happened, and I would like, what? There was an opportunity, you could have called me, right? We could have worked through this in the moment as it was happening, right? So it was the opposite. I wish they would call me more. Anyway, the idea of the 24-hour support is, crisis tends to happen at unfortunate times, right? Of day, like 4 in the morning or something. And so the client, they know about the skills, and in that moment when they're in that crisis, they can't access this part of their brain to be able to, use a skill. It's challenging, right? So having access to calling someone or having someone be there physically to help guide them through applying the skill makes it much quicker to pick up and be able to implement the skill. Now, again, depending on your role, is it likely that you're going to be able to provide this 24-hour support? Perhaps not. And, we can still find ways to apply DBT and have those skills help our clients. Okay, so fourth aspect is consultation for the practitioners. And this happens behind the scenes. The client may or may not be aware of this. And the idea here is it can be quite challenging to work with folks with high levels of suicidal ideation and behavior, intense emotional dysregulation, and so on. So supporting one another, and also making sure that we're kind of staying on track and being able to bounce ideas off of our colleagues and that sort of thing. So it's required in order to do full DBT therapy that we have all 4 of these elements. So I think, many of us will probably not find ourselves doing all 4 of these. So, then we're engaged in, DBT informed or DBT style therapy. Okay. All right. So again, the skills that we discussed, they all fit into 4 categories or buckets of skills. Arguably, you could say one of them, like, oh, it could fit here, it could fit there. So, fair enough. And there are these 4 categories of skills. Also, they fit along the core dialectic in DBT, which is between acceptance and change. So mindfulness and distress tolerance are about accepting the situation as it is. So there's acceptance. And then emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness are about changing things, either internally or externally. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these. I'll give a quick outline here, and then we'll go through each of them, and I'll give you a few examples of skills within each of these categories. And time permitting, we may, in fact, practice a few of them here together. Okay, so first one is mindfulness. This is, as we'll discover, my interpretation here is the ability to be aware, focused, and present in the present moment. And this can be, we call it core mindfulness in DBT. It's sort of the foundation of all the other skills. Distress tolerance is just being able to get through the moment, get through the difficult period you're experiencing. Oftentimes, things get better with time. And if we can just help the client to get through that period, they may find that they feel differently about things in the morning or an hour later or next week or whatever it is. So how can we give them skills to just get them through that challenging time? Okay, emotion regulation is, if we think of like the window of tolerance, oftentimes people, when they come in crisis, their window of tolerance has been quite shrunken. And then also their emotional reaction is quite chaotic, emotionally labile, right? And so we want to work long term to for emotion regulation to open that window of tolerance, allow people to be able to experience a broader range of up and downs of emotions without finding it overwhelming. And then also teach them the skill to be able to moderate their emotional ups and downs to keep it within their window of tolerance. So being able to regulate our emotions. Fourth thing, interpersonal effectiveness, being able to get along with other people. So this could be something like asking for help when I need it, things like setting a boundary, things like improving a relationship or finding and developing new relationships. Another aspect is being able to keep myself, my own sense of identity and sense of self within a relationship, so I don't kind of lose myself or become like a social chameleon. So these are the 4 categories of DBT skills, and now we will go through each of them in turn. All right. So first, mindfulness. In these survey responses, people highlighted distress tolerance and emotion regulation in particular. Wanted to learn more about those. So I will touch upon this. And I felt compelled because, as we call it core mindfulness, it is this is fundamental to all the other skills. As I like to say, if I don't notice what's happening, then I will not be able to apply any of my other skills. So it all starts with awareness and noticing what's happening. All right, so first idea here is wise mind. When I'm working with a client, this is almost always the first skill I teach. And it's, I guess we could call it like a perspective on the human mind. Okay, so I like to say it's almost as if humans have 2 different brains in our head. One could argue 3, hence the the triune brain with the survival thing. But anyway, we're going to talk about 2 aspects. So emotion mind, the limbic system, and DBT calls it rational mind, the prefrontal cortex. And I like to call it thinking mind because rational mind is not always so rational, So I like to just call it thinking mind, but your mileage may vary. And know that classically, DBT calls it rational mind. Okay, and so we'd say it's like these 2 different parts of us are in a tug of war or on a teeter-totter as one goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa. So what's it like when our emotions take over, right? And so I would have this conversation with the client, and you can think for yourself as well. Think of a time when your emotions were running high, and that could be any emotion, right? We tend to think of things like anger or sadness or jealousy or something, and yeah, fair enough. Similar idea if it's love or joy or whatever. So in these moments, you may make decisions and take actions that later on you look back and think, what was I thinking? Well, you weren't thinking because thinking mind was shut off here. And this is, I'm no neurologist here, but my understanding is this is physical changes are happening in the brain that, as, for example, the limbic system lights up, it inhibits the neurons in the prefrontal cortex. So there's like a physical inhibition about being able to, think clearly in those moments. So we're not like blaming people for getting into this state. It's just the physiological reality of how the human mind operates. Okay, so as emotions get stronger, our ability to think clearly plummets. And, at a certain point, that can be extremely unhelpful. We'd say it's equally unhelpful the opposite way if thinking mind takes over, or, rational mind. This is why I don't like to call it rational mind, because, here it's not so rational. Our thoughts here tend to be rigid, all or nothing thinking, I'm right, you're wrong, this kind of thing. Also, here we are disconnected from our own emotions. It's alexithymia, right? When we're unaware of our own emotions. And so our emotions are still there. They're still driving our behavior in ways that we don't realize, because we're completely disconnected from them. I have met people who are like, Laval, I am always strictly logical. Like, okay, sure. Okay. Right. But so that's what people believe when they're in this state. And the other challenge is empathy lives here in emotion mind. So when I'm here, I'm completely disconnected from, empathy for other people or for myself, right? So that's unhelpful. So our goal in DBT is to help balance these parts of ourselves and connect them into what we call wise mind. So wise mind takes the best of both worlds of emotion mind and thinking mind and blends them, balances them together. Okay, so what's it like to be in a wise mind? Oftentimes people here, they will feel calm, balanced, centered, content, these kinds of things. And when might the person experience this? So I want my client to identify, hey, what are some times when you're already getting yourself into wise mind, right? So what's it like to be in emotion mind? What's it like to be in thinking mind? By the way, here, like I think of like Mr. Spock from Star Trek, if you're old enough to remember that reference. But so like robotic, when I'm in this state, I find myself saying things like, yeah, correct, affirmative, that's right. It's very rigid, logical, quote unquote. Okay, so we know what it's like to be there. We know what it's like to be here. What's it like to be here? And get the client to identify, or ourselves identify for yourself, when am I in this wise mind state already? So maybe that is spending time with someone that you love. Maybe that's watching a sunset. Maybe that's listening to a certain piece of music, or gardening, or rock climbing, or boxing, or whatever it is you do that gets you into this state. Yoga, whatever, hiking in nature. So what can you do? How are you already getting yourself here? And then what's that experience like? What does it feel like? And then I asked the client, wouldn't it be cool if you could get yourself into that state whenever you want it, right? Wouldn't that improve your life? When, we're not saying emotions are bad or thinking is bad. Both of those are helpful. And wouldn't it be cool and wouldn't it be beneficial if you could choose to get yourself into that wise mind state that otherwise is so rare and so fleeting, if you could get there whenever you want it? So that's kind of the motivation for that. And then I would encourage my clients to just notice, when are you in these different states? When are you in emotion mind, thinking mind, wise mind? I should put wise mind in the middle there. Okay, so that's the concept of wise mind. One of the ways to get there is mindfulness. So this is Laval's version of what is mindfulness. Then I'll tell you DBT's official version on the next slide. So I would say mindfulness involves, one, awareness, noticing what's happening both externally around you and also internally, my thoughts, feelings, sensations. Just noticing what's happening. Next idea is focus. As humans, we tend to either have fractured attention, we're thinking of a million things at once, or we hyperfixate on one thing. Often, especially if there's like pain, like physical, psychological, emotional pain, we tend to hyperfixate there. So wouldn't it be helpful to be able to choose where you focus your attention? You can choose to narrow it down. You can choose to expand it out, external, internal, whatever's required at that moment. So choosing your focus. This takes practice, just like awareness. And then the third element, in some ways, I think of this as awareness plus focus equals presence, being in the present moment. Our mind tends to get sucked away to the future or the past. And I would say that's where misery lives. Again, not saying you can't plan for the future, that's great, or remember the past, that's awesome, and do it from the vantage point of the present. which if you think about it in some ways is the only thing we really have, this present moment. All right, so that's kind of how I conceptualize mindfulness. DBT would say there are what you're doing, they call it what skills, there's 3 things, and then there's 3 how skills, how you're doing mindfulness. So what we're doing, there's, I always think of it as like pick one, or some people say it's like levels, like first you do 1, then 2, then 3. Okay, so first is observe. So here I am just taking in information from my senses. I'm not labeling it, processing it, thinking about it. It's just raw experience, just exist. So I don't see objects, I just see shapes and colors. I don't hear, sounds. It's just, various noises, whatever. I just receive tactile sensation without processing it. It is the simplest and perhaps also most difficult form of mindfulness to practice. The next idea is describe, where now I do allow myself to add processing into this equation. And it's important I do that from a non-judgmental perspective. We'll talk about that next under how skills. So rather than saying, hey, there's that jerk over there, I might say, hey, I observe, Sally. I notice a memory of a time that she spoke to me in a certain way. I notice an emotion of anger, right? So just noticing what's happening. Okay, next is participate. So this is where I'm fully engaged in an activity. Oftentimes we do things mindlessly. We kind of drift through activities. We drive and we're kind of zoned out or whatever. Can I have mindful driving or mindful eating or have a mindful conversation? Can I be mindful while I'm watching a movie or walking or whatever I'm doing? Can I fully participate and engage in that activity, fully present? So that's according to DBT is what you're doing. And then there's how you're doing it. So 3 things here. 1, non-judgmentally. I'm going to pull this out on the next slide because I think it's quite important and challenging. And 1, mindfully, so focus on doing one thing at a time, and effectively focused on what's actually going to get the result I want long-term, not just what seems good in the moment. So oftentimes when we're not being mindful, we tend to do and say things that kind of feel good right now or seem good right now, and they lead to disaster or less than optimal outcomes. Instead, can I focus on what's actually going to get me what I truly want? All right, some examples of mindfulness. You will be provided with the slides, or you can download the video after, so you can come back. I won't go over each of these. So there's different examples. This is not exhaustive. There's many ways of doing this. It's important to recognize because sometimes I've had clients who are like, oh, I've tried mindfulness before. It doesn't work for me. And so it's like, oh, tell me more about that. What did you try specifically? What was helpful? What was unhelpful? And let's try and troubleshoot. Is there a different thing? For example, I had a client who's like, oh, every time I close my eyes and kind of look inwardly, I immediately dissociate. It's like, okay, that's not what we want. That's like the opposite of mindfulness. So I encouraged her to try some more physically active forms of mindfulness. So it's like, hey, let's do a walking meditation. Give that a try. See if that is different for you. Okay. So different examples here. 1 I mentioned is mantras. Here's a few mantra examples. A mantra could be anything. You could say, orangutan, mustard, antacid, I don't know. You could just repeat that to yourself. And, it's nice if it's something meaningful for you. So here's a few examples, or you can pick a snippet of poetry or a scripture verse if you're religious or whatever, something to focus your mind on. Again, the point is not the thing. It's the point is practicing, focusing on something. Notice when your mind wanders and just gently, non-judgmentally come back. Okay, how can you teach mindfulness to your clients? First, if you're going to try and do this, it's probably wise to practice it ourselves. This is why I started doing this. Originally, I was like very against mindfulness. Now it's like my favorite skill. So originally I was like, mindfulness, that's so woo-woo, I don't know, okay, whatever. And then I saw so much research saying it was so helpful. So I was like, okay, fine. Okay, it's useful for some people, but not for me. I'm into that, right? Then I started, learning DBT. Then I started teaching DBT, and then I started teaching other people mindfulness. And I was like, okay, I guess I should try it myself if I'm going to teach other people about it, right? So I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. I tried it. I love it. It's changed my life. It's a whole other webinar on the magic of mindfulness. But anyway, okay, so if we're going to teach this to someone, it's helpful if we're doing it ourselves so we can model that. then make sure that you have their buy-in, make sure they're open to it. Some people are resistant, like I was, and so only if they're open to it. And then try and find a time when they're relatively calm that we can discuss this with them, bring this up as a skill. By the way, this is like for every skill we talk about, you can go through this same process here. And if I don't feel, qualified or able, can I connect them, either, bring someone else in or suggesting somewhere else they can go to learn this skill. And if they do have access to a smartphone, there are dozens and dozens of apps that they can try. Again, I would suggest that you try one of the apps out before you recommend them to them. Okay, so those are some ideas about how we can teach this skill to our clients. Okay, I want to briefly touch on this idea of being non-judgmental. I like to say the human brain is a judgment factory, constantly turning out judgments about other people, the world around us, the future, the past, especially about ourselves. And judgments, they're one, not true, and two, they make us miserable. So therefore, it's safe to let go of them. And how can we do that when our brain is constantly turning out these judgments? I'm going to recommend 3 steps. There's a sneaky 4th step, because step 0 is always mindfulness, like I was mentioning earlier. If I don't notice my judgmental thoughts, there's no way I can change them, right? So how often, let's take a relatively common judgment someone might have about themselves. So here's what I've heard from many of my clients, some version of, I'm a failure. Okay, so how often does that thought, I'm a failure, float around in my brain without me even realizing it, right? So step 0 is to notice that it's there. Okay, step 1 is to ask myself, is this a judgment? And recognize and label something as a judgment. Okay. Once I've recognized and identified it, then step 2 is to let that go. Easier said than done, takes practice. Again, mindfulness will help you here. And then step 3 is replace that with something more true, more accurate. So for example, if my thought is, I'm a failure, it would be an improvement to think, I'm a failure at school. I'm a failure at work, like something more concrete and specific. It would be helpful to think, I'm a failure right now, right? So each of these are kind of refining this. And the word failure is kind of judgmental in and of itself. So, let's get more clarity. I got fired from my job. That's less judgmental and more accurate, more truthful than I am a failure, right? So we want to keep working with the person to have closer and closer to, or like more, what's more true than this initial statement. Oftentimes this involves give the devil his due, like what's the kernel of truth in the judgment? So find out, what's the part that is accurate in the judgment, identify that, validate that, and then think, well, what's the nuance? What's the other perspectives here? Okay. So practicing these steps will help you shift your brain away from, constantly judging to being more non-judgmental, more neutral and open. Okay, let's talk about distress tolerance skills. All right, so acronyms, time for the acronyms. Okay, this is TIP. The T stands for temperature. So when you are emotionally dysregulated, having a rough time in life, oftentimes we can be dysregulated as well in our temperature. So one application of this might be to wrap yourself in a warm blanket or whatever, turn the thermostat up or down or whatever, make yourself more comfortable or change your temperature. And another application of this is cooling yourself off quickly. So oftentimes when we get emotionally, heated, we get hotter. So the classic way to do this is to dunk your head into a bucket of cold water. This also engages the mammalian diving reflex. So by getting your face wet, particularly with cold water, it can help to lower our metabolism, so slowing down our heart rate and dropping our blood pressure and so on. Now, I'm not a physician here. I'm not going to claim to have intimate knowledge of this, but that's my understanding, right? That so this can be helpful, particularly if someone is really escalated. They're like at a 9 out of 10. It's difficult for them to use many of their other skills. So doing something like this can help bring them from a 9 down to like a 7. And then now maybe they can use some other skills to come further down. Okay, so that's the temperature. I stands for intense exercise, similar idea. Back when I used to have so many like panic attacks all the time, and I would notice like, oh well, when I do martial arts, I my heart rate's going, I'm sweating, I'm having the same physiological things, but I don't have this panic associated with it. So this could be, one of the reasons is to, give your brain a reason why I'm feeling this way. That's like one aspect to this. Another thing is if, in historical or prehistorical times, hunter-gatherer societies, a lot of our problems that we faced, adrenaline would really help us, right? It's like fight, flight, freeze. These very visceral primal reactions are going to help in our survival. In our contemporary context, oftentimes that's not so helpful. So when we're distressed, we tend to have this, HPA axis activation going on. And so having a way to kind of burn away some of that extra energy and bring ourselves down a bit can be helpful. So engaging in some intense exercise can really kind of burn away some of the extra energy. I should say for both of these, we want to be cautious. So with the ice thing, like, don't give yourself hypothermia or frostbite or something, right? Here with the intense exercise, don't injure yourself with your intensity. I had a client who once was exercising 6 hours a day, and she was damaging her body doing that. So, don't do that. Okay, next, paced breathing. So again, when we're under stress, we tend to either hold our breath or hyperventilate, and that's often not helpful. So being able to take a step back and regulate our breathing is beneficial. I'm going to invite us, if you're willing, to do a few breaths together with me. So I'm going to do something called box breathing. You may be familiar here. So I'm gonna pick a number 4. Now you may find that might be too high or too low for you. So if you're like finding this unhelpful, you may want to modify that number up or down. Okay, so we're gonna breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, out for a count of 4, then hold, and then we repeat in. Okay, so if you're willing, please consider doing this along with me. Okay, so we're going to breathe in, hold, out, hold, in, hold, out, hold, more in, hold, out, hold. Okay, cool. So you can type in the chat if you like. How did you find that? Was that helpful, unhelpful? Do you feel better, worse, the same? Did it have any effect? Let me know. So these are the kinds of experiments, right? I often like to frame with my clients, hey, we're just trying this out. If you're willing, let's just see what happens and then take note. How do you feel? Also in this note, sometimes, so these are distress tolerance skills. So I'll have clients come back and be like, oh, I tried that breathing thing. It didn't work. Like, okay, interesting. Tell me more. And they're like, oh, well, I did breathing just for like 10 minutes. And for those 10 minutes, I felt better. But then as soon as I stopped, my problems came back. And so I'm like, oh, is that this not working, or is that this working, right? It's like, it did exactly what we were hoping for. It's distress tolerance. It helped you tolerate the distress for a period of time. Yes, breathing will not solve your problems, right? For most challenges you're facing. And it gives you a reprieve, right? That's oftentimes the point. And it helps you kind of, settle yourself, getting you back into wise mind, so that you can then maybe from there take a more active change approach. So this is under the acceptance umbrella. Okay. Another point I'd like to mention is people can sometimes feel like it's invalidating to be like, hey, I'm going through this, I'm going through that. And you're like, hey, have you tried breathing? Right? So these like simplistic sounding, things, it can feel invalidating to them, right? So I have to be careful about that. I want to really like validate what they're going through. And then I want to say like, hey, like this is just like one tool that can help you maybe like feel a little bit better in the moment, so that you can maybe face those things more effectively, right? So I'm not trying to, again, invalidate their experience there. Okay. The next P stands for progressive muscle relaxation. So this is about, we tend to carry a lot of muscle tension with us all the time, right? So we're kind of tensed up here. And so this invites us to tense our muscles to like counteract that, right? We go the opposite way. We overcorrect by tensing them even more. Again, don't give yourself a, Charlie horse or something here, a spasm, but tense your muscles and then fully relax them. And then by practicing this, we can remind our brain, oh, right, that's what relaxed feels like, right? Okay. All right, I'm noticing in the interest of time, I need to move on. I was going to have us practice this one too, but all right, we only have like 20 minutes left, so I gotta keep moving along here. Emotional regulation. All right, please. They're really stretching to make this one an acronym. It's like physical health, but pay attention to your physical health. So eat well, eat nutritious food, stay hydrated, right? Notice I'm drinking a lot of water. Avoid mind-altering substances. If you are distressed, now's not the time to have a whole bunch of, weed or alcohol or whatever, right? It's not going to help you out in the long run. Get enough sleep, not too much, not too little. Exercise, not too much, not too little. Okay, and suddenly if you take care of your physical body, you may find that your emotions are a lot smoother and more easy to regulate. Okay, my favorite skill, radical acceptance. If we're faced with a problem, a challenge in our life, we have 4 categories of things we can do to respond to it. 1, solve the problem. 2, change how we feel about it. 3, accept it the way it is, even if you don't like it. And 4, stay miserable. Okay, so you always can choose one of these, right? So, and the beauty of, okay, misery is a choice. So it's fine if you pick it, no judgment. And if you're sick of misery, then you can choose one of the other ones. Now, sometimes number 1, not an option. You can't change, you can't solve the problem. Number 2, maybe not an option. You can't change how you feel about it. Some situations, neither number 1 nor number 2 are an option. It's you either accept it or you're miserable. Those ones, you require radical acceptance. So we would say in DBT, this is borrowed from Zen Buddhism, pain is unavoidable and suffering is optional, because suffering equals pain plus resistance. So if resistance is not letting go, not accepting, right? Hanging on, no, this can't be true. So by letting go, by radically accepting, I can transmute my suffering into ordinary pain, which is manageable. Okay, better idea, half smile. So our bodies and brains are interconnected. If I feel an emotion, then my body will respond. On the other hand, if I put my body in that posture, in that state, then my brain will respond to that. So the idea of half smile is just relax your face and then turn the corners of your mouth up. Marsha says it can be subtle enough that no one else notices. Just you're pulling the corners of your mouth up. If you do that for a while, your brain's like, oh, what's happening? Are we happy? Okay, well, dump the endorphins in. And so you may find that you genuinely start to feel happier. Okay, interpersonal effectiveness. All right, so here we got to choose what's your priority. There's different skills depending on what your priority is. So 1 is there's something specific I want. I need to ask for something. I need to say no and set a boundary. Then dear man is our skill. If my priority is to maintain or build the relationship, then I'm going to use give. And if my priority is to maintain myself, my own sense of self-worth, self-respect, personal identity, then my skill is fast. Okay, I'm just going to touch on one here in the interest of time. Dear man. So dear man, the dear part is what I say and what I do, and the man part is how I do it. Okay, so describe the situation non-judgmentally. So, when you're disrespectful, no, what does that mean, right? So when I notice that your voice is raised, or when I notice that the garbage is not taken out on Tuesday night, right? Description, non-judgmental description of the events. Express is the impact on me. I feel this way, it impacts me in whatever way. Again, non-judgmentally. Assert is my request or my boundary, like here's what I need to happen, or here's what I'm asking you to do. And then reinforce is what's in it for them. Try and make this a win-win. So I'm getting something, they're getting something. They're more likely then to do what I ask. Okay, and then how I do it, man, is mindful. So be in the present moment. Appear confident. You don't have to be confident, just appear confident. and be willing to negotiate, be willing to give a little to get a little. Okay, so there's like one interpersonal effectiveness skill. Probably I know our time is coming to an end quickly here. I had some case studies lined up. I'm thinking though we may want to switch to Q&A. Andrea, what are your thoughts?
It might be worthwhile to do even one of the case examples, and then we can go to the Q&A.
Okay, sounds good to me.
There is one question, for example, so I think we might be okay with doing at least one case example.
Okay,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Thank you. All right, so let's do first case example here. People submitted so many amazing cases. I wish I could have gotten to all of them. And well, let's try to do one. Okay, so 16-year-old female. I tried to keep this as exact as the person wrote it as possible here. So 16-year-old female, childhood trauma, physical abuse from the father, daily self-harm, ongoing suicidal ideation, very high achiever academically, refuses to engage with other forms of treatment other than school social worker with this writer. So the person who asked this. And then, so, I inquired, like, what have you tried? So the person says, hey, we tried TIP, we tried emotion regulation, opposite action, pros and cons, self-soothing, mindfulness, tolerating distress, etc. So in other words, a lot of things, a bunch of things we didn't even get a chance to talk about tonight, and some things we did. So this person has tried many different skills. And so what's happening? So the client is engaging well when we talk about, activities about the future, future goals. Okay, so that's positive, that's good. And the challenge is utilizing the skills in the moment when they're in distress. So I picked this example specifically because it's like, this person is familiar with DBT, so don't feel like you have to be, right? You might just be learning about DBT maybe for the first time today, I don't know. And this person, it has familiarity with a wide array of different DBT skills, and they've managed to teach that to the client. Awesome. And the client kind of gets it intellectually, understands it kind of abstractly, and then is struggling to make that transition to using the skills in the moment. So okay, what do we do here? How do we help this client to be able to use their skills in the moment? So think back to those 4 things. It'd be great if we had that 24-hour support now, right? So if we could just hang out next to this young person, all day, every day, and when she goes into crisis, we're there, right? That'd be great, right? That'd be super helpful. And unfortunately, we probably don't have that opportunity. So what can we do? Okay, so like any skill, we have to start small. We have to, I would say, pick like just 1 or maybe 2 things to have the client work on at a time. So let's try and work out together with them what's going to be the highest leverage skill. So this client, she's familiar with a lot of things here. So we could ask her, hey, like, which of those do you think, if you could only master one skill, which one do you think would have the biggest positive impact on your life? So maybe I'm going to pick one that we actually talked about. So maybe she says paced breathing from TIP, or maybe she says mindfulness, because those are ones we talked about. So, okay, great. All right, let's say she's like, oh, I can't pick. So, all right, cool. We've got 2. We're going to talk about paced breathing, and we're going to talk about mindfulness. Now, those actually blend together nicely. This is a good thing about many DBT skills. They kind of, you can kind of blend them together. So I can be mindful of my breathing, and so that could work well. Okay, and so we get the client on board with being willing to try the skill. And then next, we have to troubleshoot them with them. All right, so this may happen over the course of several sessions. So we say, okay, we're going to try mindfulness. Let's try it together here in the session. So not every skill you can do that, but a lot of them you can. So, pros and cons, self-soothing, like a lot of these things, we can try it with them in the session. So now they at least have some instances of using the skill with us. And then we just want to generalize that application of the skill. So we want to help them to, they can do it with us. And then how can you do it in these other scenarios? So get them to try and start small. So people try to apply a skill in like 8 or to 10 situation. They're trying to learn a new skill. that's gonna be difficult. It's like trying to learn how to swim in the middle of a storm in the middle of the ocean. Not gonna go super well. We might have to, but we prefer not to have to do that. So encourage them to find really easy, simple scenarios to apply their skill. Look for a 2 out of 10 scenario and start there. Get them to try it and get them to report back. How did it go? What went well? What didn't go well? And then we slowly build it up and build it up from there. Okay, another thing, if they're like, oh, despite doing all that, I never think to use my skills. So one thing we could do there, DBT has a diary card, so that's just one version of doing this. But if we get the person to record after the fact, what happened, what was the situation, and what skill could you have used there, this will train their brain to look out for those opportunities. So we're kind of debriefing after the fact, right? So we do that with them in therapy. We unpack a scenario and say, hey, what other skills could you use there? The formal version of this is called chain analysis. That could be like a whole webinar on its own just on chain analysis. But yeah, so we unpack all of that with the client and help them realize like, oh, there was an opportunity for me to use this skill. There was an opportunity I could have used that skill. And wow, if I'd done even one of these, the situation may have turned out very differently. So again, this is training their brain to now in a similar situation in the future, they have an alternative version in their mind. Like, oh, there's two paths, right? When we're in our default mode, there's only one path. But we're at least introducing a possibility of alternative outcomes. Okay, so that could be a way to train their brain to look for opportunities to use their skill. And then if we couple that with the idea of, okay, start small and practice your skill and build it up slowly in more and more challenging scenarios, these two things together, I think can help people do this. If we're still struggling, I'm going to want to try and come back and check in that the client is in fact motivated and engaged to do this, like to learn this particular skill, and they're not just saying it because it was my suggestion, my idea. I want to double check that I'm supporting them in their goal, not that I've somehow kind of coaxed them along into a goal that's not really theirs. So I think if people are really struggling a lot, that might be part of what's underlying that. Okay, shall we? Let's check our Q&A question here now. All right, someone asked, are you supposed to ask the client to envision a square as they're doing the breathing? Great question, thank you. So this is about the paced breathing. Again, paced breathing is just one way, the box breathing is just one example of paced breathing. You can do whatever version works for you. I think it's helpful to have the client start by either envisioning or actually using their finger or something to like draw a box, because it helps to make it more concrete. If I'm just thinking, okay, breathe in, hold, breathe out, I might not, if you're under distress, your mind is going a million miles a minute. And so you might think that you're taking 4 seconds to breathe in when actually you're taking like, a quarter of a second. So I think like physically moving can help a little bit with making it more, concrete and remind me to do all of the steps. Okay, now if they're in an actual real life scenario and they need to use this, it may be socially awkward for them to, start doing this in the middle of, wherever they are. So yes, at that point, we want to encourage them to, envision it in their mind, rather than actually physically playing it out. So, okay, cool. Let me check the chat and see if there's other questions here.
Thank you, Laval. There are a couple questions.
Okay, can you highlight
the one that's in front of me is, do you promote or negate use of therapeutic transference?
Okay, nice. Yeah, I think I'm going to have in classic DBT fashion here, I'm going to say, well, there's pros and cons, and there might be times where I do either or both of these things. So let me give you an example of a client I was working with last night where, should we take a step back and say, like, what is transference? Just make sure everyone's on the same page there. So transference is, at least my definition is, the client kind of having a particular relationship with me as the therapist, and they might be kind of having let's call it resonance with previous relationships they've had. I guess the kind of psychoanalytic people would call this like an enactment or something, where they're playing out relationship patterns that they've had in the past with me. And so this can be beneficial or potentially harmful depending on how it plays out. And the kind of sister concept here is countertransference, where I have a similar thing, toward my client. So if I sort of have a special connection with one of my clients or whatever, that could be, again, maybe helpful or maybe potentially problematic. And again, there's like ethical considerations there, and there's a lot we could say. But anyway, so do I either encourage this idea of transference from the client to me, or do I discourage that? So let me give you an example of a time where I encouraged it. So this client I was working with last night, he's been seeing me for, I think, probably about 3 years now. Struggles with narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder. And so there was a thing where he's very resistant to anyone, as he would say, quote unquote, giving him advice. And to the point where he becomes very like aggressive towards past people. And he's told me about a bunch of stories, like his high school guidance counselor, his tutor, his teachers, his classmates, like people at the gym, anyone that he perceives as kind of giving him advice, he takes offense. So here I am trying to do therapy with him, where it's like, well, I'm going to be I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to give you advice in that way, but I'm going to be making suggestions that he might interpret as giving advice, and that could be problematic. So I'm going to start by building up rapport. And so there's a very delicate thing that, I guess is not treating narcissism webinar here, but there's a very delicate line where, just like someone with say a psychotic, having a psychotic episode, with say something like schizophrenia, for example, I don't want to invalidate their experience if they're having a hallucination, for example. At the same time, I don't want to feed into that, right? So it's a delicate balance there. Similar idea here with the narcissism. So I won't repeat the exact things he was saying, but let's say he had some extremely grandiose goals in life, and everyone's coming along and telling, oh, be realistic. Oh, you're never going to accomplish that, or whatever, right? And so he was taking that as an attack and being really distressed by that, and then he reacts to that by lashing out at the person, and this cycle. So I want to draw a delicate line where I'm not telling him, hey, you're never gonna accomplish that thing. At the same time, I'm not gonna say, oh yeah, you totally, you're definitely gonna do that, right? So it's this delicate line. And so by me being maybe one of the only people in his life who was open to the idea, where I'm like, look, I don't know what your abilities are. Hey, maybe it's possible that you'll accomplish X, Y, and Z. I'm not sure. I don't know. So by allowing him to kind of, have that transference toward me, where I'm maybe one of the only people in his life who's at least leaving the door open to these possibilities, that allows him to build like trust and rapport with me. And then I can then, I don't say use, but, I can utilize or leverage that relationship later to actually start to call it and question some of these things, in a way where he's actually more ready to accept and be open to alternative perspectives, because he values my the relationship with me so highly. Hopefully that makes sense of when I would encourage this idea of transference. What about times where I would discourage it? Okay, well, I was once working with a client who, she was also working with a colleague of mine, and it was more of the challenging dynamic that evolved between the two of them, where the client started viewing my colleague as her mother. Like she would call her mom. When my colleague went to go home, the client said, "You're going to your other daughter now," right? Like these kinds of things. Okay, so that's like a kind of too far in terms of the allowing the transference thing, right? So that to the point it became problematic for their therapeutic relationship. Hence why the colleague asked me to kind of work with her as well, and we were slowly kind of working to disentangle that. Okay? So there's times where it's helpful, times where it's unhelpful. So hopefully that answer is helpful. Cool, Andrea.
So just to jump in for a few seconds before we wrap up. Um, it would be very relevant and helpful to have a more thorough discussion around when that kind of transference is helpful and when it's not, because that's kind of a big question.
Mhm.
And so it's something that I think we all run into as therapists, but I think it would be helpful for people to have a more systematic understanding of the risk and the benefits. So just to put that out there, it was a big question to ask you in the last
Try
few
and answer it
minutes.
in like a few minutes. Yeah.
Yes, I
Yeah.
recognize you were rushing to do that. There were two questions remaining in the chat, and unfortunately, we are out of time. But I think it would be fair to say the participants here tonight have enjoyed your information and what you've shared with us. And so, if those who are still present with us could look out for us to announce a date and a time to have Laval join us again. Um,
Anyone, if I can jump in for a second here, I'm happy to answer questions I didn't get a chance to. Here's some contact info. Just reach out. I'm happy to answer anything. So you can email me. I'm taking a risk of putting my Calendly link if you want to like book some time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that are outstanding. I know we didn't get to anywhere close to all of them, so please feel free.
and I don't think you can always answer every question in an hour and a half, Laval. I think you were very ambitious, and so were we. And so we really want to thank you very much. This is clearly a topic that we need to further explore in more details, and you can respond to in a more specific way. So we will be sending out a survey and asking everyone to indicate their interest in a further topic or a session that would explore in more detail particular topic to move us forward with our DBT skills. Okay, I know you tried very hard to go through so many, and I know you must be out of breath. You ran as quickly as you could. It is now 1 minute after 8, and so I want to thank everyone for coming. Please look out for your email where we will send you a survey, and we would like to know if you would like to join us again and invite Laval to join us, but we need to hear from you. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
All right.
Laval, thank you. Thank you very much.